The views and opinions expressed by guests on this show are those of our guests, not necessarily ours. We are interested in presenting different viewpoints and strive to be neutral parties. We leave it up to you to make your own judgments. Welcome to Vision Chat, a podcast about spiritual topics, with your hosts, Virginia and Stina.
Hello and welcome back to Vision Chat. In this episode, Virginia and I are interviewing J. Alan Cross. J. Alan Cross is an award-winning author, podcaster, and explorer of all things supernatural. Over a lifetime of magical study and paranormal investigation, he has learned quite a bit. Sometimes the easy way and sometimes the hard way. Nowadays, he hopes to share his knowledge that he has gained to help out the new generation of spiritual workers and build more bridges between communities in need of connection. Welcome, J. Allen. So nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a minute since I've been on a podcast, so it's nice to be back. So,
yeah, that's great. Do you want to start off just telling a little bit about yourself and how you got into witchcraft?
Yeah. So, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I've written a couple of books. My first one was American Brujeria, which is kind of about how Mexican American folks in the United States practice their own brand of folk magic. Anytime we have a community that is isolated or kind of in between two things, we end up seeing that they create their own spirituality, their own methods of working. And so that's kind of what that book's centered around. My second book, my most recent one, was The Witch's Guide to the Paranormal, which was kind of my field guide for doing what I do on our paranormal investigation team. So when people think paranormal investigation, they think of what they see on TV, which I think as witches, we should know that media representation is not always super accurate. And something that I was really wanting to bring to not only the witchcraft world, but also to the paranormal world was methods to help, to fix, to do something about the hauntings. I joke that I wrote that book out of spite because I would have a lot of people contact me from like out of state. They'd be like across the country and they'd be like, oh, like I'm experiencing this. Can you help me? And I'd be like, no, I can't, but let me get in touch with the local paranormal team. Like, let's see if we can get you some help. And so I'd look up like where they were and find their paranormal team and send them a message and be like, okay, I have this family here. They're experiencing this kind of activity. Can you go and help? And 99% of the time, if I got any response at all, the response would be, we can't do anything to help, but we would love to come and take pictures. And I'm like, that is not what we need. That is not what we need at all. So I had already had years under my belt. I think at the time that I wrote the book, I had about 15 years of experience under my belt, actually working with hauntings, with haunted houses and haunted spaces, and had developed an array of techniques for not only identifying these types of hauntings, but also what to do about them. And so this book was kind of a field guide for working with haunted spaces and what to do. And after that, now I've just been working with my local community, trying to see if I can make any sort of a difference for the positive.
Have you always called yourself a witch, or like what labels or terms are you comfortable with? Like witch, exorcist, healer, medium, psychic. There's so many out there.
There are so many of them out there. So I have long identified as a witch. It was the word, especially like in childhood and growing up, that felt the most correct. It was the one that I resonated with the most and the one that really was like, yes, this is the one. In modern times, the word and the title has changed a lot. And so I find myself sort of waffling back and forth of if I actually fit in with what modern witches look like. But I do still identify as a witch, sometimes as a folk witch. I do identify as a healer, sort of reluctantly. And I also, technically, my psychic skill set, I am what is known as a post-cognitive psychic medium and clairvoyant, which means that I often don't see the future if I'm in the space, I will often see the past, things that have already happened there. So as opposed to being precognitive, I tend to be postcognitive, which is very helpful in the arena of paranormal investigation, because places are haunted because of things that happened in the past, not because of things that will come, or at least not that I've come across, but that the paranormal is weird and might in fact include that.
That's fascinating. Would you ever call yourself brujo? So do you identify, like, do you say brujo, or is it like that doesn't resonate?
It depends on the context. I don't generally call myself that. Sometimes people do, and if that makes sense for them, then that's fine. I didn't really grow up speaking Spanish. I didn't grow up in Mexico. I grew up in Oregon. I feel almost slightly too far removed to just decide that that's going to be my identity. It is something that is very much a part of me and something that's very close to me, but I don't know I would title myself that. Especially because those words have very different meaning depending on where you are geographically.
What would you define as a witch? Or what is your definition of a witch?
That's a dangerous question. I'm going to make so many people mad. So a witch is someone who practices witchcraft at the end of the day. Someone who is connected to the unseen realms in one way or another, and then taps into those energies and those elements to create change and spells, mostly. So I think that the actual witchcraft portion is very, very important to the title of witch.
Like, in your opinion and in your experience, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about witchcraft?
Witchcraft can be difficult to understand, but also that's, I think, sort of the point sometimes, is that things that were well understood weren't witchcraft. They were religion or folk practices. But if you saw somebody else doing something and you didn't understand it, then it was witchcraft, right? So part of witchcraft is the misunderstood part. And so I don't always want to undo that in a lot of ways. But I do think that when it comes to modern witchcraft and modern spirituality, any sort of modern spiritual practice, particularly that which is outside of mainstream religion, which we're seeing more and more people go to. I think the biggest misunderstanding that I'm seeing so frequently is that spirituality is about ourselves, that it is about us as individuals, me, myself, and I am God, things like that, which I do agree, yes, that the divine is in us, all those things. But I find that people are finding spirituality and then it's isolating them really intensely. I have my own private practice. I don't want to show anybody my private practice. These are my private rituals. These are my private things. I don't connect with other people during it. I don't work spells for other people. I don't help other people with it. And I think that there's something to be said about a private practice. I think that we all need one, but I think we've sort of accidentally given into this very intense individualism and not allowed it to create connection, because that's what spirituality is all about. It's about connection. It's about connecting with something outside of ourselves, something that is maybe bigger than us or more mysterious than us, or communities around us. It's all about connection. And I think that we've tried to go that road alone too much. And I think that we need to focus more on the connection portion than the isolation portion. It's not specifically about us. It's about the universe. It's about the world. It's about nature. It's about each other.
Why do you think it's more isolated now than it was before?
I think there's a few reasons. I think, first of all, is depending on where you live, a lot of times people won't have a community around them that understands or practices sort of an alternative to mainstream religion. And so people often find that they have to go it alone, which makes sense. I think that that's totally fine. If that's the hand that you're dealt, then absolutely. We get very used to that. And then it becomes very, very scary because a lot of people, they have religious trauma, which means then that if they're going to then show somebody else their spirituality, then it opens them up to criticism and ridicule and being told that they're going to hell and things like that. And so in a lot of ways, I very much understand that if you're in a specific area, you may not be able to create the community with your spirituality, which is totally fine. That doesn't mean that we can't do things adjacent to our spirituality in community. I think things like, volunteering in your community can also be a very spiritual experience, even if you're not like chanting and lighting candles. I think the other thing too is partially social media as well. there's a lot of this posturing of everybody is the best witch that there has been, the most powerful, the most mysterious. And I think a lot of people are really afraid to pull back that curtain and show people that they're just a regular person with a regular spiritual practice. And they're a lot of times social media allows us to place ourselves on this really high pedestal that we then get really concerned about it getting knocked out from underneath us if someone actually sees what our real practice is like. It's a lot of fear, I think, that we carry with us. And I don't think it's always necessary. I think fear can be survival, and that's important. But I do think that if we slowly begin to pull back that curtain, we might realize we all have a lot of the same stuff behind there, and we can share those things. And then that can create community that is outside of mainstream religion.
I love that your focus is on like, we should be creating community here. This shouldn't be like such an isolated practice. And if it is, maybe that's a reflection of like your own fear. Like, what are you afraid of? Being exposed, or like you said, the ridicule, or being rejected, or, you know, like what you're talking about sounds like ego. So like if there's some pride and there's some ego of like, I'm really powerful, but I'm also just a human being. And maybe I don't know it all.
Right.
And is that okay? Will people still take me seriously if I don't know it all?
Well, and also being a human being who has an ego. Absolutely. We all do. That is literally part of being human. It's a part of our psyche. It's a part of our makeup, you know. And it always cracks me up because in the spiritual community, it's always the people with like just the huge egos that are constantly talking about how they've done ego death and they no longer have an ego because of the acid they took at Burning Man that one time. And it's like, no, you still have one. We all do. It's okay. We can all be human together, you know, spiritual humans together.
We were just talking to someone else that we recently interviewed, and we talked about this exact same thing. Like, it's okay to have an ego. That's what makes us human beings. Like, it's like, you don't need to have the ego death or to get rid of it to be like, there's some idea behind that. If you don't have an ego, you have this ego death, that you're higher up on the status of being spiritual, or more, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime we end up introducing some sort of a hierarchy, it gets dangerous. And so what's so funny is so many people leave Christianity because they really did not like this idea of a hierarchy, that there was saved people and not saved people, that there were you know, those who are going to heaven and those that are going to hell, or when the rapture comes, who's going to be left behind, right? There was like a whole book series, I think it was called Left Behind, that like was just traumatized all of us. And so then people run to spirituality. They run to New Age, witchcraft, spirituality, all that stuff. And then when we get there, we find the 5D ascension. Are you ascending with us? We're all receiving downloads, but you're not. Like, and it creates the same thing. Like the way that people talk about like 5D ascension, which I have no idea what the hell that is, but it sounds just like the rapture. It's like some of us are going, some of you aren't. Like, and it's anytime we create that, I think it's dangerous.
There was recently, and this is a little off topic, or maybe it is on topic. There was a show, I think on Netflix or something, and there was like a docuseries about this cult leader who called herself Mother Love or something, and it was all about that, like the 5D, and like she convinced all these people to follow her, give up their jobs, give her all their salaries, go and live on a compound with her, basically support her drinking and habit and her doing drugs and everything. And it was a big mess, but she had everyone convinced that there was a 5D ascension, and they were spaceships that were going to come in and pick them up, physically pick them up and take them on to the next whatever. It was a mess. Needless to say, none of that ended well for anyone involved.
Yeah, it's that repackaging of, and what's so funny is there's one of my most favorite people to listen to talk about religion or spirituality. Her name is Nadia Bolz-Weber. She's a Lutheran pastor that writes books that are just incredible. She's not your average pastor though. She's like 6 feet tall and like swears like a sailor and just covered in tattoos, and she's an ex-drug addict and like all this stuff. Love her. But she talks a lot about how humans, we love nothing more than to know who we're better than. And that gets repackaged in so many ways, whether it's Christianity, oh, we're the saved, you guys aren't, or we're going to 5D or you're not. It's this dichotomy of we're better, and so if you join this group, you can be better too. And then, you know, all these promises come with it that don't really come to fruition. But it's that same idea of we love to know who we're better than. And I think that does happen in spirituality as well, because as long as no one can see our spiritual practice, then we can pretend like we're better than everybody too, in a way. So it just keeps getting repackaged in so many different forms. And so I think that's something that we should all look around at in either spiritual communities or our own personal practice of, how much does that factor into what we're doing and how we're presenting ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's so important what you're saying right now, because it's so easy to kind of portray this personality. It's not good how easy it is. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you got interested in looking at hauntings and ghosts and stuff like that?
Yeah. So, like a lot of things on my spiritual journey, it wasn't really something that was on my list of things to do. Um, I kind of joke that I'm sort of just holding on to the bumper of spirit and it's just taking me wherever it needs to go. So, when I was a kid, I went through something that I refer to as my download. I don't generally feel like I was born super psychic, but at the age of about 7, I had a series of migraines every night for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks-ish period of time. And I don't remember a lot from that time period other than just laying on the ground and clutching my head and crying, and my parents trying to feed me those like grape chewable Tylenol for kids. But nothing really helped until it just stopped one day. Not very long after, I began to have really vivid dreams about places I'd never been, people I'd never met. And then days, weeks, months later, I would either go to this place that I'd never been before and be like, oh, okay, like I dreamed of this place ahead of time. Or there would be some sort of news story that I had already dreamt. Or there would be like, that was my one foray into precognitive stuff. And that lasted for a while. And I remember at that time, I told my mother, I was like, I think I might be psychic. And she's like, okay. And like, she handled it really well. She didn't be like, no, you're not. Like, she was like, all right. And the next day she came home from work. And this will date me quite a lot, but she had an article from a magazine that she had cut out, and it was about a new movie or a new show that was coming out in the U.S. called Medium, about a woman named Alison Dubois, who is a real person. And the article was about this woman, and she was a psychic who worked with the police to help solve criminal cases. And she was like, look, there are other people who are like you, and they are doing good things with it. And I think that was when it really instilled in me that I had to do something with it that was meaningful. I had to help. There was a reason why whatever it is that's at work in the universe decided that I needed to be this way. And it wasn't just to keep it to myself and just read my own tarot cards in the corner that wouldn't do anything for the world, So flash forward, my mother begins to figure out her own abilities as well and begins working as an animal communicator in our community, very small community. And so people start coming to her about like, hey, I think my house is haunted. Technically, you're psychic. Can you do something about it? And she's like, I can't, but my kid can. And I'm like 15, like, all right. And how that had come about was I had made the mistake of being like, I'm so glad I'm one of those psychics that just has dreams and I don't talk to dead people. Surprise! Because God, whatever you want to call it, has a sense of humor. And so the dead people started very quickly around the age of about 12. And so by the age of 15, I had a decent enough handle on it that I could actually go to people's houses, businesses in my community and see what I could do. It was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of me just being like, I don't know, but I'll give it my best shot. And turned out I was pretty good at it. So I started just going to people's homes, seeing what I found in them and doing what I could. A lot of it was mediating between the dead people and the living people and being like, okay, here's why they're upset. Or a lot of times it's telling dead people that they're dead, which can be a lot for them. But I do find that they do process it pretty quickly. It's difficult to hear that, you're dead. But a lot of them kind of go, what? And then they go, oh. That makes sense. And then it was a lot of that starting at about 15 years old. And then when I was 21, 22, I joined a paranormal investigation team and have worked with them ever since.
Oh, that's pretty young. What is the most common mistake people engage in that results to like a haunting or that can backfire them?
The number one thing that I see, there's kind of like a top two, but the number one thing that I see is renovations in their home. That will make it happen. Like so many people will be like, we've lived in this house for like 15 years. It's been totally fine. And all of a sudden I'm like, did you do a home improvement project? They're like, oh yeah, we knocked out the wall in the kitchen. And I'm like, like, that will 9 times out of 10 will stir something up simply because, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons for it. So maybe whoever built the house really wanted it to be that way for a reason. Like, you know, you're kind of upsetting their vision. Or anyone could tell you, people like to hide things in walls, whether it's keepsakes, things that they really didn't want other people to find. The number of times people who have been doing construction in old buildings and found bodies in them is enormous. So a lot of times people will hide things in walls. There will be secrets, things that they don't want brought to the surface. So I often find a home renovation to be the number one thing.
Did you mention there were 2 things or like a 1 and 2? So renovation.
But people get mad at me for it. So the second thing is messing around with occult spirituality, which is something that definitely happens. And whenever I'm working with new witches, I always think about it as like a rite of passage. Like something nasty is going to show up in your house at some point, especially when you first start. And I think that's kind of your first test as a witch, is to get rid of it. Like, because a lot of times people, especially in modern spirituality, they're like, you're supposed to make friends with it. You're supposed to build an altar. And it's like, no, you're supposed to hold your ground, defend your space. Like it's something that happens a lot. And in today's spirituality, we're told a lot of things like witchcraft is completely safe. Everyone can do it. There's no consequences. There's no rules. There's no anything. And that's, I think, a direct result of capitalism entering, because you can't sell your book or your products if they're for select people or experienced people, or if there's danger, right? So we have to create this lie that there's absolutely no danger to occult magic of any sort. And that means that I come into a lot of people's homes and I'm like, so what happened to start this? And they're like, I have no idea. And then I go and like spend 2 minutes in their house, and either it smells like witchcraft really intensely, or I come across a spirit and I'm like, hey, it's time for you to leave. And they're like, no, I was invited. They said I could stay. They built me an altar and everything. And I'm like, what? And then I come back out and they're like, I'm like, so are you like practicing any sort of witchcraft? And they're like, oh, I'm just manifesting abundance for my most. And I'm like, okay, do we cleanse? Do we have protection? Do we do? No, I'm just manifesting a boyfriend. And I'm like, but there's other skill sets that need to come with well-rounded witchcraft. And when I talk about this, people are like, oh, so you're against witchcraft. And it's like, no, I'm clearly not. Seeing as this is what I do for a living, is educating people on how to do witchcraft. I am pro-educated, well-rounded. I think when we dabble, when we don't take it seriously, then we can have some issues come up.
So there's really no such thing as just, throwing some things together. And you know how sometimes people, especially on social media, they come out with all these like videos and reels, like you just throw these things together, you light some candles, and then you're good to go.
I mean, yeah, magic does work like that, but there's going to be a time at which you need to actually know what's going on beyond just getting what you want from the universe. And I think a lot of people approach witchcraft not as a practice that they need to be well-rounded in, but more as some sort of like a spiritual ATM. You want a boyfriend, light this red candle. You want money, light this green candle. And it's like, that is a perk of witchcraft. But if we're going to be witches, we need to know our business, right? We need to know what's happening. We need to know how to discern if this spirit is friend or foe. Not all spirits are friends. We need to know what to do if it is foe, and how to protect ourselves and our space. I think a lot of times people skip over the foundational things because, again, there's that social media thing about who's the most powerful witch, who's the most advanced witch. And so people like to skip over the basics because they want to be up there. They want to be one of those. What people don't understand is that the advanced work is in the basics. The advanced stuff is going back to the basics and shoring those up and figuring out if you really understood them, if you are taking them to the depth that they need to be taken. That's where the advanced work is. And so people just want to go like, oh yeah, sure, just going to skim over the introductory manual and then dive into the deep end, and then things go sideways. And we need to, again, take this seriously.
Sounds like if you go to IKEA and buy a cabinet or something, I'm like, oh, I don't need the instructions. I can just do this by myself and it won't fall down. That's fine.
Right. And you still have like 4 screws left over for no reason. And you're like,
yeah. Where does this go?
Yeah, for sure.
Are there also any agreements that can lead to haunting?
Oh yeah, so many agreements. So when we talk about agreements, a lot of times people don't understand that the power of free will that humans have is really, really important. And the spirit world has to play by those rules. But the spirit world is also very good at getting around them. We've all heard about like fairies, asking like, oh, can I have your name? And you say, oh, my name is Joshua. And then, oh, they have your name. Like, right, they steal it from you. But they can't just come up and just take it from you. They have to sort of trick you into agreeing that they can do that. So the spirit world has to have our permission for things. There's a lot of ways they can go about getting it. So when it comes to agreements can be made in a lot of ways. So for instance, something that's very common is that hauntings will start very slow. They'll start as little things, like kind of like a knocking in the walls, maybe, or like a little whispering happening. And then we eventually respond because we're naturally curious. We're humans. It's part of who we are. And so one day we knock back, or we ask, who's there, right? That's an invitation for it to engage with us in communication, which isn't going to, get you possessed or whatever. Like that's fairly innocuous at that point, but then it builds on itself. And so, for instance, a lot of times what happens is people will go to try and get a bad spirit to leave their home. And as they're doing the cleansing, big things will start happening, like doors will start slamming or something will start falling off the shelves or something like that. And then they'll stop and they'll say, oh, it's not working. Well, you've just made an agreement with it that it can stay and what you're doing isn't working, instead of being like, yep, get out. Another one I like to use is this idea of a Ouija board. Again, I'm going to make a lot of people mad because people like to say things like, Ouija boards are no different than tarot cards. And I'm like, okay, well, shuffle a stack of Ouija boards for me. Clearly there's difference between tarot and Ouija. The main difference with a Ouija board is that it allows us to make many agreements very rapidly, especially in the culture that they're often used. They're not always used by seasoned spiritual professionals. So a lot of people who use them do think that they are. It isn't always something that's being handled in the best way. And so an example of that would be, okay, so you get out the board itself. That's an agreement for communication in general, right? I'm getting out this board. This is what it's there for. Here's what we're doing. Then people will make a statement like, is there anyone here who wants to communicate? That's a very wide net. That's a really big invitation. And some people I've even heard will say, is there anything here? Which is even wider. We're not putting any sort of parameters around it. We're opening a big door to anything that wants to communicate. Then we ask them to respond by moving the pointer. Now, there are 2 ways that people believe that a Ouija board works. One is the belief that the spirit moves the pointer itself, at which point we are giving the spirit permission to manipulate objects in the room with us. The other way people believe that the Ouija board works is that the spirits influence us to move the pointer. And if that is your basis of belief, and that's what you're asking the spirits to do, you're giving them permission to perform a partial possession on you, to influence and work through you in order to move this pointer. Is the Ouija board bad? Is it a magnet for demons? No, but the method of use and the non-specific manner it's often used in, and the rapid number of agreements that are made with it can can be difficult. So the good news is that agreements are very easy to undo. We simply state with sincerity and no fear, that can be the hard part, that we are no longer agreeing to that. Where people go wrong is that they have a lot of fear when they do that, and fear can be an agreement. Because if you're going, I break this agreement with you, and inside you're going, oh God, I hope that worked. I hope it doesn't, decide that it doesn't care and do that, because then you're creating more and more agreements with it. You have to act like it's a kid throwing a fit, where they're like, especially like if you've ever been around little kids and they're like, I really want to like sit in the fire. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. That's not even an option. That's not even, no, like, no. You have to sort of do that with the spirits too. It's like, no, we won't be doing that.
So it's like using like a very firm, like, no, that's not going to happen. We're not doing that.
Yeah, and having it be end of story, and not having it be like, well, maybe if we could, no,
Sure.
No, we're not doing that.
Joshua, do you have any stories I know you've done hundreds of clearings probably by now. Do you have any stories that stand out to you that have impacted you, either from like working with a particular client or working at a specific location?
Yeah, there was one that I wasn't expecting that ended up being actually really beautiful. I was called out to this old farmhouse in rural Oregon. It was like a original family homestead. They had all lived there for like 100 years or something like that. It's just like this really old place, and they had a lot of activity happening. This was one that we actually kind of rushed to because the activity seemed to be centered around a new baby that they had brought home, and there had been an incident where the crib had actually been picked up and moved in front of several people who watched it happen. And so they were really concerned that it was focusing so intensely on the baby. They didn't know what to do about it. So me and a friend of mine from the paranormal team go out there and we do a walk around, and I am met with the spirit of this man who is intellectually disabled individual, and he was very nice, but the baby was causing him a lot of anxiety. It made a lot of noise. It was new. He didn't like it. It was causing him a lot of panic, a lot of anxiety. And come to find out that he was actually buried on the property, and likely due to the time period that we believe that he was alive in, we believe he may have been kept as kind of a secret out there on the farm, and then died there and was buried there without being kind of brought out into society too much. So we went out to where we sort of think he was buried, and he did want to cross over. So we decided, okay, we're going to do the crossing over. And so we do this thing where we open the light so that they can go through. And a lot of times spirits will get very hesitant at that moment when the light opens up. Some of them are like, see ya, and like go. Other ones though, like they're faced with it, like this new world, this new thing that they're going in, and they become very apprehensive. And so the kindest and the most efficient way that I found to help them through that is to ask somebody that they knew and loved to come back through and sort of escort them to the other side. I find it to be very beautiful, very helpful. It's helpful for them. It's a very kind way to do this. So I ask him, and it's so funny because I'm asking, but both me and this other psychic who I'm working with at the same time are both receiving information from him as he's responding. And so it was really great to get the same exact thing as this other psychic at the same exact moment. So I turned to him and I'm like, okay, was there somebody who has passed on that, you really had a strong connection with, that you really loved and that you really trusted, that you would like to see again and have them bring you through? And he immediately brings up a dog. And, we're always thinking, we're used to getting, oh, my grandmother, oh, my dad, oh, my brother, whatever it is. But this is the first time anyone had ever said a dog. And it was like this like dark colored border collie. And they were so happy to see each other. And then he goes through, but I remember that being so emotional for me, especially as someone who like absolutely loves dogs. Like, I don't think that there's anything more pure in the world than a dog. But that was something that really, really stuck out to me.
That is so wonderful and moving. Other than human spirit, what type of entities have you come across in your work?
Oh, all kinds of things. It's so funny because I feel so often that I just should be put in a straitjacket, because I'll have to sit down with people in their homes and be like, you don't have a ghost, but you have his fairies. like that's such a weird thing to have to like look at, like as a grown adult, look at other grown adults and be like, you have fairies in your house. Luckily, if they're at the point where they're calling someone like me to help them, they're okay with whatever it is that I have to say. But yeah, you will come across all kinds of things. And to be honest, the spirit world is so diverse diverse in the amount of different types of spirits and creatures that are there. I know in the West, we really, really want to narrow it down to like angels and demons and like our departed loved ones maybe, but often those get kind of lumped in with angels. And that's not how I generally experience it. I think of it more of like if you watch like particularly like Japanese shows where they do like the spirit world or whatever, there's just like a bunch of different types of everything you can imagine on the other side. I find it very similar to that. So it's hard to categorize each of them as specific types, but I have ran into some reoccurring ones that I don't classify as human. So we have, of course, land spirits, and land spirits, I think for me are often the scariest ones because they're a big question mark. They're a big question mark. I feel like, when it comes to like demons or whatever, like the things that people refer to as demons, like these negative entities, I feel like there's a playbook for them. Here's how we handle them. Here's what we do. Here's how we identify them. Land spirits, though, they come in many different shapes and sizes. They're there for different reasons, and some of them can be quite eerie. We were called to a house once where they had sent us a photo ahead of time of something that had been left on the porch of this home. So this guy had gone out into the forest, clear cut a bunch of trees, and built a house, which is sort of like renovating, but in nature. You're gonna stir something up. And something came up onto his porch. And from what we could think and observe from the photo that he sent, and he felt the same way, it looked like something came up and threw up a bunch of blood onto his porch, along with some piece of an animal that was partially digested. And when we got there several days later, and it had been a very hot summer at the time, it was all still wet. It was still like nothing had dried out. And that's something that sometimes people will bring up in supernatural occurrences, particularly with things that are not good or not happy, is this idea of slow decay, that things will stay very fresh, or dare I say juicy, for longer than they really should. So that was very eerie to show up on that. And the things this guy was reporting seeing in the area around his house were like, the way that he described it was sort of like a Bigfoot type thing, but made out of shadow with red eyes. And he would see it like in the daylight. It wasn't just like at night. He would sort of see something in the woods. He'd like go out to his car and it would be standing in his driveway. Or he had a grandson that would come and stay with him. And his grandson wouldn't come out anymore because his grandson had seen it as well. And so those ones are always the eeriest ones. We do run across other things, sort of like the Hat Man, which is something that people have seen for centuries. It's a fairly common one for people to know about. We even have stories of it in Native American legend. One of the legends that I found that I think exemplifies the Hat Man the most is, I believe, I'm so sorry if I'm wrong, I believe it's from the Seneca Nation. There is a story of a spirit that they refer to as High Hat, who is a tall, kind of skinny character with a tall top hat. And they would leave meat, sometimes like nailed to trees and stuff, like in the area where he was said to live, to keep him over there and happy and fed so that he wouldn't come out.
Do you ever get scared or a little bit fearful yourself when you come across this stuff?
Oh, always. So yeah, I'm pretty much always like 2 seconds away from shitting my pants, but like it's part and parcel with the work. I usually have to just remind myself that if I don't do it, no one else is going to, and therefore this family won't get help. And that usually helps me to not. I mean, I'm still afraid, but I think, isn't that like the definition of bravery, is doing the thing even though you're afraid? So yeah, I'm usually terrified, but you still do it, and after a certain amount of time, you become very hard to shake. So I have seen some stuff, and that's very helpful for me because having already seen it, I'm not surprised by it. So like I'll be doing something and doors will slam, and I'm like, yes, this old song and dance, let's wrap it up. Like I've gotten to the point where I can bring an energy of kind of like unimpressed boredom to the exorcism process. And I find that that's a huge help for me, because it's like, yes, I have seen this before. Here we go. Like, yeah, slam the door. That doesn't mean you get to stay. Come on, let's go. So that's been very helpful. Is with experience comes lack of originality on the spirit side. So
well, to a certain degree, then it's like, what do they call it? Like an exposure therapy in spiritual realm. So then the more you're exposed to these things, the less surprised or impressed you are. So the less power they have over scaring you and scaring you away from what they know you're there to do.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And the less fear that you're able to, like, the fear will always be there, but the decision to just not let it control you or dictate what you're doing is very, very helpful, because if you can sort of overcome that fear, then you take away a lot of their power. So spiritually speaking, a lot of these negative entities, the reason why they're scary, the reason why they do the scary things is because they actually feed on the energy of fear. They feed on our fear. It's something that they eat as food. And so, like any predator, they're designed to get that food. They're designed to look scary. They're designed to know what freaks you out. They're designed to know all these things. And so if you refuse to give them that, then the power dynamic switches, because when you're afraid, they get very big and very scary. And when you're not afraid, they actually get very small, and the power dynamic is very different. And so they're actually a lot less dangerous if you're not afraid of them. So there we have the ability to sort of disempower them by simply being bored.
Do you have any tips for people that get anxious or very fearful to how do you switch out of that?
There are a few tricks. The first knowing is that the anxiety and the fear will be there, and that's totally fine. It's when you start letting it override you, when you start letting it introduce a lot of stuff into your head, like that's when it starts getting concerning. We'll always have anxiety. I am full of anxiety all the time. It's totally fine. It's part and parcel with, again, being a human, especially in 2024. We're all just full of anxiety. So that's fine. The other thing that you can do, though, is introduce humor to it. There's nothing that makes things less scary like making them funny, and that kills them. So for instance, before I even knew that like the Hat Man was like a widespread thing, I had already come across him at like 3 or 4 different cases where I'm like, I'm coming across the same kind of species of spirit. And then I Googled, spirit of man wearing a top hat, and just came up with like just pages and pages and pages of just like stuff and lore and sightings and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is a thing. But he had become so common in my personal explorations that I had already named him. I call him Clyde because it no longer seems scary if I'm like, oh, it's Clyde. Or like, you have like this really like scary demon thing in the corner and you're like, all right, Billy Bob, let's go. Like, I mean, like name it something funny. And I feel like that often helps to humanize it, make it a little bit funny. And then that also too, if you get out of the space of fear and into the space of humor, that's a higher sort of vibrational level too, which also makes you stronger at the same time. So, and it's harder to make agreements with them if you're not afraid. So while we shouldn't necessarily like underestimate spirits or like be super disrespectful, when it comes to like safety, and if it's something that's like really nasty and like not human and wants to feed on your fear, then the best way to deal with that is not be afraid.
I love that approach, and I love your sense of humor, which is also all throughout the book. And well, both books, but mostly The Witch's Guide. I love that, just that really funny sense of humor about things, because it can get really serious, right? Like all this stuff can get like super serious and like heavy, and it can be really like dark, but it doesn't like, yes, but then also you can bring in some light and laughter with it and cancel it out.
Absolutely.
I'm really curious about something. It's just a personal curiosity, but you mentioned portals in your book, and it's, for me, I haven't really found too much information out there on how do you work with portals? What are they? What do we do when we encounter them? Can you give us any advice on that?
Oh, absolutely. So I have a whole section, like you were saying, a whole section in my book on portals. And portals are really, really important because I find that people will often teach, house clearing or whatever. And they usually have like a one trick method for that, which I don't always agree with. But they also tend to forget about this idea of a portal. And that's something that I'll run into as well. And people are like, I have had like 4 paranormal teams out here. Each one of them have said that they've cleared it. And then like the activity keeps happening. And I come into their house and they have a big old portal somewhere in the house. So activity is just coming in. So I had no doubt that, yeah, the teams before had probably cleared it, but then they had left this big open doorway to the other side in. And so it is important to look at if we have something like that happening in the home. And if we can find it, some people are able to sense them. Generally, I'll be able to spot them pretty easily simply because they feel to me like a big spiritual washing machine in a space. Like the energy is very like, will be like spinning suddenly like over in like a weird corner. I'll be like, okay. And sometimes I can hear them too. So like I can pick up on them fairly easily. If that's not something that's in your wheelhouse, you can find them with like pendulums or like forms of dowsing. You can find them that way. But when you do find them, we can make some decisions based on information that we can find about them. So if you're able to intuitively sort of interact with them and get the information, or if you're able to use like a pendulum or something like that, we can find out things like if it has a direction to it. So I find that a lot of portals will either be pointing into the home where stuff is coming in but not going out, or they'll be facing the other direction and stuff will be going out, but nothing's really coming in, or they'll go both directions, where things are coming in and out. Some of them cause more issues than others. So for instance, the ones that are pointing into the home tend to cause a lot of issues because stuff is just kind of like popping in all the time. And I'll usually get a sense if there is a portal, like when I'm first talking to the family and I ask them to describe the activity. If it's very broad and kind of random, where they're like, well, like, you know, if they're like, okay, it's always the old lady in the rocking chair at 3 a.m. It's like, okay, well, that's probably not a portal. But if they've got like a bunch of weird random stuff that's happening and like the activity keeps changing, like maybe it was the old lady, but then now it's like these little green things and then those are gone, but then now there's this other thing but then that's back. And then if it's kind of all over the place, that lets me know that things are coming in and out through somewhere, as opposed to having just like one spirit that's there or like a couple or something like that. So if it's pointing into the home, we can close it. If it's pointing out of the home, we may want to leave it open until the end because it's a really convenient exit for anything that's in the home to get out. So I like to leave those until the end. You can also change which direction they're going. So if they're pointing into the home, you can change so that they're pointing out of the home. So you can turn an entry into an exit until you're done if you want. And all of this is done the same way that all magic is done, which is through focused intention and will and the manipulation of energy. And so if we can focus in on what it is that we want, which is to change the direction of this, we can implement our energetic technique. I like to change the direction of a portal. So for me, I always perceive them as spinning a certain direction. And so let's say it's spinning clockwise and I feel like it's coming into the home. What I'll often do is I'll often sort of engage with the energy of the portal and I'll reach my hand into it and I'll go against the current in the other direction and I'll begin swirling it the other way. And if you've ever like done a thing where you have like a bucket of water wherever you kind of mix it up one direction and get that going and you go the other way and it kind of like sloshes out, but then it starts to pick up momentum the other direction, you can sort of do that with the energy to get it going the other way. Similarly, if you have it, you can engage with the energy to collapse it, to make it shrink. The good news is working in the non-physical is that you can collapse it through different layers of things like time. So that it's collapsed not just right now in this moment, but also like tomorrow. And also, so we can collapse it down with focus, intention, will, and whatever technique we are planning to employ.
What is the difference between a portal and a residual haunting?
Oh, that's a great question. So a portal is in and of itself it's a doorway, but the way that the haunting is different is, you know how we were talking about how like a haunting that includes a portal will be very erratic, very random, switch in and out between different kinds of things. Residual hauntings will be very predictable. They're things that happen on a schedule or over and over again on a loop. So a residual haunting is your classic story of, it's said that every night you can see the spirit of this woman walk to the top landing of the home and look out the window for her lover who is lost at sea. The difference is that there's not an actual spirit there. What was happening is she did that so many times in life that it got imprinted on the space. And then the space is replaying it over and over again. Now, sometimes you can have human spirits that are stuck in a location that will be moving on a loop. That is something that will happen. However, those ones can be interacted with. They can be sort of stunned out of it a little bit. Like if you do some sort of like smoke cleansing around them, they'll kind of like sort of wake up out of it a little bit. Or if you make like a big noise around them, sometimes it'll startle them out of it. But a residual haunting, there is no spirit. It's just like a projector being played over and over again. There is some scientific ideas about why that happens. We have something referred to as stone tape theory that supposes that the mineral deposits are in certain places will create a higher likelihood of something like a residual haunting because of the way that certain minerals will interact with the energy of a space. But we don't know, like most things. When it comes to the paranormal, we really don't know. It's a possibility, though.
I've been told when humans come to this earth, there's a part of our soul that is going into a human body. But when you go to a ghost, is that still just a part of your soul? Or is it your soul that is getting stuck if it's getting stuck and not crossing over? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think it depends on our definition of ghost. So you ask a lot of people, like, oh, well, what is a ghost? And people will give you wildly different answers. It's leftover energy. Oh, it's the collective belief that's of something that's created something. Or it's, like a lot of times. For me, when I talk about a ghost, I'm referring to what we also refer to as an earthbound human spirit. So in my understanding of it and what I've interacted with, it is the soul, the spirit of a living person that has exited their body but is still remaining here. There's a lot of ways that we can talk about it, because a lot of times when the idea of like soul comes into the mix, it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. It seems maybe religious. It seems maybe too pure of a thing, this idea of this soul being stuck here. So sometimes people prefer to talk about it as like our leftover energy. But I think we're still talking about the same things. We're just using different words. And so for me, a lot of times it is the spirit of a person that has left their physical body. Their physical body has died. And at which point, in a perfect world, we then cross immediately over to the other side. But for a lot of reasons, we'll find that sometimes that process doesn't always work. And we end up stuck here either because we chose to, or because something outside of our control, like maybe we didn't know that we died, and therefore we're not able to see the light or cross over. There's a lot of reasons why a spirit will stay here. Now, there's an interesting question about this idea of, okay, so we're in, let's say, heaven or the universe or the spirit world or whatever it is, and then we come to earth, right? And then we're in a body, and then we're out of the body, and then we come back and all that stuff. So there is a theory that I do sort of follow a bit about, like, okay, so if grandma goes up to heaven and I send her my prayers and, I have this connection with grandma on the other side, and then if she gets reincarnated, then is she no longer up there where I can, have these interactions with her? Is she just gone from the spirit world now? I have to go find her somewhere, in Cincinnati or whatever. And I think we can exist in these spaces all at once, because the spirit world really likes to do stuff like that doesn't make a lot of earth sense, but makes a lot of spirit world sense. So I always say that whenever there's a question of, is it like this or is it like that? The answer is yes. It is both. So I do find that, even if grandma goes up to heaven and is then reincarnated here on earth, that she's still in heaven, but she's also still here at the same time. Does that make any sense? I hope.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Well,
Thank
because we've also heard, that you can exist in different dimensions. There's alternate realities, and it's not just us right here, right now. And then there's a debate about, time. Like, is it linear? Is it not? So yeah, that's what this is reminding me of. Like, there could be different dimensions and different versions of us having a different conversation somewhere else.
Yes.
So what's next for you? We're definitely going to ask you to please come back on the show, because we have so many more questions, and this is, a really, really fascinating conversation, and we just want to know more. But for now, where can people find you? And, are you for hire? Or are you working on more books? What's going on in your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So right now I am doing a lot of focus on sort of community work. And actually I am planning on pursuing that more. There's a lot of sort of prestige that comes with being like an online person who's influencing people, but there's also sort of a hollowness to it. And when I can actually be in shared space with people who are in my community, who have needs, things things like that. I have felt that that's where my place is and where I'm heading towards. I do still try to be online every so often, and I am still available for services. My books are kind of sparse right now. I don't have a lot of time open, but I am doing mediumship readings for people, and I'm very much enjoying that. They've been a huge blessing. They've been very fulfilling, and they've also been really hysterical in a lot of ways. Spirit has a sense of humor, and I don't think as a medium you ever stop building vocabulary with them of how to understand them, and they're giving you different symbols. So for instance, I was reading for somebody, and the spirit of this very, very old woman, she was like in her 90s, was trying to show me how she died. And she starts showing me skiing, winter sports skiing. And I'm like, and I'm trying to tell this to the person that I'm reading for. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And she's like, no, it doesn't. She was trying to tell me that she went downhill fast. So it's been a
Nice.
process.
That's nice.
Yeah, so it's been a process of doing that. So I very much have loved doing the mediumship readings. So I do have that open to book with. If you just go to my Instagram, that'll be there, so you can book with me through the link in my bio on my Instagram page. But yeah, I do readings for people. I do some spell work for people. But yeah, right now I'm focusing a lot on community, but I'm still available to my online folks.
Thank you so much for your time and all of your wisdom. It was a pleasure to have you on, and it was a joy. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for having me. I really had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Vision Chat. You can find more about us at visionofprofoundhealing.com, where we offer readings, courses, and classes.